Go
Greetings.
ahead.
Welcome. Oh, we are so glad to be here. We've had a great weekend doing a lot of teaching and serving, and it feels so good to come from the heart. Today, we decided to talk about setting boundaries, which for me, I guess, starts with figuring out what they would be first. Going inside, I guess, would be my number one tip on boundaries. If nobody else was involved, how would you want to be treated? What would you want to be doing? And get clear about that first. I'm a big believer in connecting to our source energy, which is the love energy that we three believe in and know to be true. And we would highly encourage you to go inside and start asking for what's going to be your next step to find that self-love, to find that self-confidence. And from there, you can start to teach people how you want to be treated. Yeah, exactly. So going inside first, finding what is true for you, and then having a secondary discussion about boundaries. I've got some other tips too, but I'd love to hear yours as well.
Well, I think Judy is absolutely 100% correct. Everything starts with self examination. I don't care what type of personal growth you're thinking about or looking at. If you can't look inside, you're not ever going to find the right answers. You'll be searching forever. But
Yeah.
for me, when you think about boundaries, I think about I remember people treat you the way you let them treat you. And boundaries, if you think of them in a physical form or like fence boundaries or property lines, we all have what we call our bubble, and it's up to us to allow people in and out of our bubble. We have the right to choose to not interact with someone. We have a right to say, you can't treat me that way. And I think that's the biggest thing is just understanding your needs and how you want to be treated and determining how you want that to be. So my biggest tip is to remember that you always have a choice.
A choice.
A choice. A
Yeah.
choice to interact or not interact with someone, to do something or not do something. It's your right. So just remember, start with self-examination and then make the choice.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And I think that's interesting when you said about needs. I think knowing what your needs are is so important. But I think if you grow up and you've lived a lot of your life as like a people pleaser, somebody who believes that I have to earn love from people, it may be hard for them to understand what their needs are because they've never thought about it, because their needs have never been full. And this was the situation for me. I never really noticed what my needs were. Because I was constantly making sure everybody else's needs were met themselves. So I think really looking at your needs is a big, really, really important thing with setting boundaries. And setting boundaries, I think understanding why you struggle to set boundaries is a big problem. Are you afraid of not being liked? Are you afraid of losing that person? Are you afraid of the relationship changing? Are you afraid of a negative consequence? What stops you from setting that boundary? Maybe your problem is to do with the other person, or maybe it's something to do with yourself personally. But asking yourself what's stopping you from setting those boundaries, and then identifying what those boundaries are, and then communicating those boundaries, and then honoring those boundaries. So not going back on them. If you say to somebody, I don't actually like that when you do that, and and then they maybe change your mind in some way, and you feel like you have to then go back on something you've said to keep them or to please them, then you could be doing yourself a disservice then as well. So I think honoring your boundaries when you when you communicate them is just as important. So yeah, definitely think it's very important.
I think probably most of us learn from our parents or guardians that we need to follow certain rules in order to be loved, or even if not loved, to be cared for, to have our needs met as young children or babies. And it probably starts there. And unfortunately, most of our parents or guardians have not been brought up in pure love. I mean, that's kind of what we come to the human school for, to learn to stand up for ourselves and just rediscover what this self-love is. That's a great point, Sara. The other thought I had was, what I did was I started small, because I was a really huge, over-the-top people pleaser, because that's just, I was a chameleon, and I could figure what you wanted really easily and give it to you with the hopes that you would then like me. But setting boundaries then is like, I was boundaryless, in the beginning. And I think starting small is a good place to go, with someone you're not that close to, that it wouldn't seem too difficult, maybe a complete stranger. To just say no thanks, and just practice saying no, and then practice saying, well, what I would rather do is, and then go from there and build up. And if you don't have a role model necessarily, I often go to a book or a movie and just picture that person who was so brave to do this or that, and imagine stepping into that place of imagination where you start to build your confidence in your mind's eye first, and then go practice on somebody small, not somebody small, a small situation that wouldn't seem too scary.
I think saying no is I think it's a problem so many people have, isn't it? Especially and you created a course on it, Sandy, haven't you? The power of saying no.
Yeah, as a recovering people pleaser, it's, my fear was that, what if I make them mad? What if they no longer like me? And when you get right down into it, you cannot set proper boundaries unless you learn to love yourself, unless you accept yourself as you are. Because if you don't accept yourself, how do you really know what your boundaries are? I mean, we look at property boundaries, and we don't want people building a shed on our property. That's ours. We would protect our property. So why are we so easily letting people step into our bubble and take our boundaries away? And you have to look at it like that. You have to say, why am I doing this? And if you can't understand why you're doing it, it's going to be hard to create the boundary, because you don't know where the line, right? You don't know where the line's drawn. You don't know what to do. So, it's hard. Yeah. You have to learn to say no. You have to be okay with making people upset. You have to be okay with people saying, well, okay, and getting mad and walking away. If people put their needs before yours without hesitation, you don't need those people.
Right. That reminds me of a speaker once who gave this analogy that was so in your face, it really made me think. It said, well, what if someone walked into your house, into your front door, and had a huge bag of old garbage, and then just started dumping it all around your living room? That is similar to someone coming into your house or into your office and just spewing all their negativity on you. And for some reason, that image is stuck with me as a, wow, that's what it's like. And I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? It's crazy when you think of it like that. I think definitely remembering your voice matters as well. And I think it can be quite intimidating to think, okay, I'm not used to speaking my voice. I'm not used to setting these standards and boundaries, because, a lot of us can go through life not really ever honoring our needs first. So it can be quite a daunting and intimidating thing to do. So like you say, start small, start making small choices. And it's a skill. The more you do it, the more it's just going to become who you are. And each time you do it, each conversation you have, even though it's a little bit difficult, each time you voice your standard and your boundaries, even though you're a little bit scared, it builds your self-esteem each time, you know. So just remember that, because it's so, so important. Your voice matters, you know. Your boundaries are yours. You're entitled to them. You're entitled to voice them and honor them, because it's what you need. So, you know, definitely more people saying no and more people setting boundaries is what we need for self-esteem.
Yeah. True. I have found in doing so that, for example, my mother was my heaviest critic. And when I finally stood up to her, she was really surprised, you know. I was in my 30s, and it was so hard to break away from her because she was getting mentally ill, and it was confusing with that element mixed in. But she was going to kill me, you know, with her criticism and her needs being met first. It was heartbreaking, but I had to do it to be my own entity, if you will.
And how did that feel after you did that? Liberating, free?
Very liberating, but also shocking. It felt harsh. You know, people didn't understand that I didn't have a loving mother, and so how could you do that to your mother? And they just didn't have my life experience. So I realized that they don't know what I've been through, and I had to make my own decision by me, myself, and I, you know, and not take anybody else's into consideration anymore. So it got really hard and intense, but in hindsight, it was definitely the best thing I've ever done.
That's what it is. Sometimes, even though it's scary, you know, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Right.
You know, these conversations can be very scary, especially when it's family. But, you know, if it's based on what you need for yourself, they're 100% always worth having. Yeah. So
exactly.
It's sometimes hard to contemplate that someone that is supposed to love you is mean and, you know, talks to you in a way that they think is all right because, well, they're your parent or they're your authority figure. But you have to remember that you have the right of personal choice. You know, you have to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take that. And don't let someone take your power away. And basically, I'm sure Judy would agree that that's what your mom was doing, was taking your power away from you. And it's such a freeing experience when you realize you take it back. And it's such a shock to them because they don't even understand why you're doing it sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're helping not only yourself, you're helping them if they can see the light of what they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. If nothing else, on a spiritual level, I now understand that my mother I signed up for her, and I wouldn't have learned any other way in this lifetime. So if we were to summarize, I guess I would say, go inside, find out what's right for you, start small, setting boundaries with people that you don't, maybe strangers are easiest to start with, and then practice in your mind's eye what that would look like, and know that it's for your highest good and your liberation and your freedom and your, you know, ability to be the person you came here to be.
Well, I think the biggest thing is remember that you have a choice and to identify what you need out of any relationship or any situation. And once you do that, then you can determine whether or you need to set a boundary or what type of boundary you need to set. So I would say, you know, remember your needs and you have a choice.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And I think, you know, for me, looking at the reasons why you struggle to set boundaries and working on the reasons why you struggle is definitely a powerful thing for you to do. And recognizing what your needs are after that, communicating them, and then honoring them, and, you know, making sure you're doing this. The more you do it, the easier it's going to come. But just remember that, you know, give yourself permission for yourself to be heard. And you're really going to feel liberated and empowered. And, you know, even if sometimes it's difficult or a little bit scary, that's okay too. Just go through it anyway. You know, because the other side of that discomfort, that pain, that difficult conversation, you're going to, you know, birth this new kind of empowered self. A part of you, a confident version of you is going to come through. And that's what we're aiming for when we're on this self-esteem journey, isn't it? So just, yeah.
That's brilliant. That brings a tear to my eye. So such a pleasure to be here with you both.
We always have a good time, don't we?
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.